and welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to our sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York, for funding this series and enabling us to put this on each week. Today, we are joined by Dr. Vanessa Abou-Khalil, who will be presenting on Japan-Middle East relations. Dr. Vanessa Abou-Khalil is an executive associate at Cray-Ebb, Tokyo, a public relations consultancy. She works with a variety of corporate and public sector clients and with a focus on government and media relations. Her areas of expertise include Japan's foreign policy, Japan-US alliance, and Japan-Middle East relations. She is also a member of the Research Institute for Indo-Pacific Affairs, RIIPA. Dr. Vanessa graduated from St. Joseph University in Lebanon with a bachelor's degree in French and Lebanese law, and she completed her doctoral and master's degree in political science at Kobe University. So, Dr. Vanessa Abou-Khalil, it is a pleasure to have you with us today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kidd. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to all YCAP's organizer for this event. I am very excited to be here today, and thank you very much for the audience. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy my presentation. So as Ms. Kidd already introduced, I am Vanessa, and I have studied, I have a background in law, and I am a member of the Lebanese Bar Association, and then I came to Japan to pursue my graduate studies in political science. So I did my master and PhD at Kobe University. And today I work at a PR consultancy, Cray-Ebb, who is specialized in government relations. So I would like to share with you a little bit about Japan and Middle East relations. And I have some prepared PowerPoint. And yeah, here we go. So for today's presentation, I will be explaining briefly about the historical evolution between Japan and the Middle East. And then I will go on to, I have chosen two events, which are the first oil crisis and the second oil crisis, that I feel represent quite well the dilemma that Japan went through between preserving its alliance with the United States from one side and preserving its energy interest with the Middle East from the other. And then we will just briefly look at how this tumultuous journey is going up until today and what are the perspectives for the future relationship with the Middle East. So to very briefly, the important date to know in the Japan-Middle East relation is 1973. But before that, there was some sort of relationship between the two. During the Meiji Restoration, for example, there was some trade between Japanese and Arab merchants via the Silk Road. And then there was a strengthening of these ties through cotton and textile trade during the period between the end of the First World War and the beginning of the Second World War. But it wasn't until 1952 that things started to get more serious when Japan shifted from coal to oil. And so it started paying attention to the Middle East because it started importing oil from the Middle East. And at that moment, the Middle East is an area that is very abundant in oil. And also it was at a very low cost. So it became very easy for Japan to gradually become dependent of the Middle East. And by the time the first oil crisis happened, Japan was already the leading nation importing oil from the Middle East, and its dependence reached almost 80%. And so when the first oil crisis that I will explain in the next slide happened, this is when Japan had to think of a foreign policy toward the Middle East, a serious foreign policy toward the Middle East for the first time. At that point, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Iran were among the main suppliers of oil. And so regarding the first oil crisis, I will give you a little bit of a background. So it started with the Yom Kippur War. And the Yom Kippur War is a war in a series of wars between Arab nations and Israel. And this war, although short in time, had a very very strong consequences for all the parties involved. And the name of the war comes from the fact that in Judaism, Yom Kippur is the day of, is a sacred day of rest, of praying, of fasting. And so the Arabic countries, and more particularly Egypt and Syria's armed forces, they coordinated an attack on Israeli placements in order to reclaim the territories that were captured by Israel during the previous war that took place in 1967. So they chose the Yom Kippur War as a way of surprising Israel, and then maybe it would be less prepared to defend itself, especially that there was no intensifying conflict before that. And so it took a lot of heavy casualties from all sides and 2 United Nations ceasefires for the war to end on October 25th. And following the war, the OAPEC, which is the Arab Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, so it's all Arabic countries that are rich in oil, they have an organization, a multi-government organization to coordinate energy policies among oil-producing Arab nations. And so they impose an oil embargo on nations that are supporting Israel. And the way they did it is they separated, and this is where Japan had to navigate this dilemma, and it had to kind of, for the first time, navigate the pressure coming from both the Middle East and the United States. So the way that OAPEC did it is it separated all countries into 3 categories. So there was the first category of friendly nations, and those nations did not have any change in their usual production quota. And then there were the neutral countries, and those countries suffered just the general production cutback, which was, at that time, OAPEC decided to decrease its oil production by 5%, and then 5 additional % every month until the withdrawal of Israel. And so the neutral countries in this case would just suffer the general production cutbacks, and the hostile countries would be facing a full embargo. And the hostile countries this full embargo was aimed at the United States because it supplied Israel with weapons. And it was also aimed at the Netherlands because it also offered its military assistance. And so Japan, in order to not be put in that category of hostile countries, it had to take to implement policies that were aligned with what the Arabic countries wanted. But from the other side, there was a pressure coming from the United States. And more specifically, there was a meeting between the United States Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, and the Japanese Prime Minister at that time, Tanaka Kakue. And during that meeting, Kissinger was telling Tanaka to not succumb to OAPEC's pressure, because this would mean that if Japan doesn't align with the United States, this will complicate peace efforts. And this will also have a negative impact on the United States-Japan alliance. And eventually, what would this also lead to is a potential embargo by Jewish financial heads on Japanese products. So basically, the United States was trying to push Japan not to succumb to the pressure. And so what Japan ended up doing, what happened here is that the priority was definitely given to the United States. So during the meeting between Kissinger and Tanaka explained that a decline in oil supplies would diminish Japan's economy it will diminish Japan's economic progress from 10.7% to 5%, so more than double. So the effect that this will have on Japanese economy would be brutal. And so Tanaka asked Kissinger if the United States was willing to compensate for that oil shortage if Japan was to align with the United States. And the United States response was a refusal of this request. And this led to Japan re-examining its policy in order to align it to its national interests. So here, from that point on, Japan really sided with the Arabic countries. But that doesn't mean that the Arabic countries immediately accepted Japan's support. So there were many trials that were rejected by the Middle East. First of all, Japan gave a diplomatic note stating its position on the war with Israel. And the Arabic countries considered that note to be insufficient and unclear. And the main element that they used was that Japan did not specify what it would do if Israel did not withdraw. So it was not enough to just say that we are against Israel's annexation. What would you do if Israel does not actually withdraw? Following that diplomatic note, there were two statements after this that were also rejected for the same reason. And what's interesting here is that it's not the political statements that actually changed Japan's status, but it's more the diplomatic and economic initiatives that the country did. So at that time, Vice Prime Minister Miki Takeo visited 8 Arabic countries and explained to all their leaders Japan's official position on Israel. And they also offered significant amount of economic aids, including 38 billion yen to Egypt in order to extend its Suez Canal, and around 28 billion to Syria in order to help build its oil refineries. And this is when, very shortly after, Japan's status was changed to friendly, and it was safe from an oil embargo. So from that case study, I think 2 things can be said. First of all, Japan was not hesitant to take a stance that is divergent from that of the United States. And it was the economic and diplomatic initiatives that actually changed the outcome, and not really the political interference. Now, the second oil crisis, which derived from the Iranian Revolution and led to the Iranian hostage crisis, is a similar case in the sense that it also created an oil crisis, and Japan also had to navigate those pressures. So the Iranian Revolution is when the Iranian people started to protest against, back then, the Shah. His name was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. So he was the leader of Iran. And he was accused of being too influenced by the United States. And Iranian people were accusing the United States of interfering, and they saw the United States as a threat to their cultural values. They accused Iran of monopolizing trade concessions, and they accused the United States of treating Iranians and Americans unfairly by paying higher salaries for Americans working in Iran. And the Shah was just, they saw him as someone who allowed the United States to intervene in Iran. And so this revolution happened in 1978, and it ended with the Shah being exiled. And the leader of the revolution was Ayatollah Khomeini. He became the supreme leader of Iran, and he turned, very shortly after, he turned Iran into an Islamic republic. And as a consequence of the revolution, there was the second oil crisis, where also there was a lot of the oil production decreased, and there was a significant increase in oil prices. But between the second oil crisis and the Iranian hostage crisis, so I said that the Shah ended up being exiled, but he was diagnosed with cancer, and he sought treatment in the United States. So back then, US President Jimmy Carter, although reluctantly, welcomed him into the United States for treatment. And so because of that event, Iranian people thought that the United States and the Shah were again cooperating in order maybe to stage a coup or to try and take over again the control of Iran. And so some Iranian students gathered around the United States embassy in Tehran, the capital of Iran, and they held hostage all the staff that was there, all the American staff, including diplomats and others. I think the number was around 65 people, around that number, that were held hostage for around a year. So the Iranian hostage crisis lasted from November 1979 to January 1981. So this raised a new dilemma, and Japan was caught in the middle of it again. And so from one side, because there was no communication between Iran and the United States, the United States ended up imposing an oil embargo on all imports from Iran. And at that moment, Iran asked Japan to purchase the excess oil stock that was supposed to go to the United States before the embargo, because it found that it had remaining stock, and so it wanted Japan to buy that remaining stock. And the surprising part is that Japan did buy the remaining oil that was supposed to go to the United States, and it also bought more than half of it at almost twice the initial price. And this was a very shocking event for the United States, and it created a series of tension and of just mini conflicts between the two. And one of the meetings that reflects this quite well is between some of the accusations that were done by the United States toward Japan included the following. So Japanese concern was rated 1 out of 14 compared to other nations. Japan was giving Iran the impression that Western unity was merely empty words. Japanese banks were supporting Iran in managing the freeze, and Japan was the prime obstacle to collective economic sanctions. So all of this, these statements are from a meeting between Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and Japanese Foreign Minister Okita Saburo at the time, when they met in Paris. And this hit Japan quite hard to hear that this accusation from the United States and it being kind of the weakest ally and not really helping. In addition to this, the United States Congress proposed a bill imposing a 50% tariff on goods from non-cooperative nations. And this was directed toward Japan, although not stated explicitly, but this was another way to pressure Japan to shift. And it actually did. Okay, forgot to put this right. So after that, after buying the oil and after receiving this pressure from the United States, here began the gradual shift of the United States, of Japan, to align with the United States. And on December 30, 1979, the United States proposes a UN resolution for a full embargo on Iran, except for food and medicine, and it strongly asked its allies for support. And Japan did end up supporting the United States. There is a period between the embargo, the United Nations embargo, and the day that the sanction was imposed officially, because it was a long process where there was a lot of in-between meetings and negotiation. But Japan, despite aligning with the United States, it still had conditions that it did not want to let go of. For example, it asked for the exemption from the embargo of the IJPC project. And the IJPC project was a petrochemical complex in Iran, and it was Japan's biggest private foreign investment. So it really cared about not putting it at risk. And it also asked the United States for an equitable burden sharing, which means that the United States should help Japan have more oil supply that it would lose from going with the United States against Iran. And this includes Japan asking the United States to cooperate more with Saudi Arabia and asking Saudi Arabia to produce more oil and export more oil to the United States in order for US companies to export more oil to Japan. So kind of a series of chain events that would lead Japan to have a stable oil supply. And Japan also decided to collaborate with the European Economic Community, the EEC, in adopting sanctions. The EEC was created in 1957 by the Treaty of Rome, and the aim of this community was to foster economic integration. And Japan decided to collaborate with the European countries in order not to be singled out. And it felt that if it was part of a larger diplomatic unit, it would not be singled out by Iran, and it would have less of a maybe intensity as an impact. And also the United States would feel strongly supported with its allies being united. But okay, so in the first case study, we saw that the economic and diplomatic initiatives played a big role. And in that second case study, there are some elements of Japanese soft power that show quite clearly. And some of these examples include avoidance of blame. So even when Japanese officials were talking to Iranian officials and trying to persuade them to release the hostages, they did not adopt the same approach as other countries. They did not blame Iran. And it was more the meeting that happened between certain officials. All Japanese officials were talking to Iran as a way that you should not, or you should release the hostages because it would impact your international reputation. So it took that approach that it was more for the benefit of Iran rather than using statements as this is a violation of international law, violation of human rights. It took that different approach from other countries. Other examples include an understanding of different views. For example, in a Mainichi daily news article, the way that the situation was explained, it was that the admittance of the Shah in the United States is a good tradition nurtured by American democracy. And the resentment felt by Iran is a natural consequence of the former's hatred of the Shah. So it's a very understanding of both sides, not really taking sides. A third element of this soft power include the soft approach. So even when eventually Japan decided to align with the United States, and even during the meetings where they were announcing that to Iranian officials, they still were reassuring them of their friendship while announcing that they would align with the international community against Iran. And this approach, these little examples make a lot of difference because this is a very unique approach. This is not the standard approach that usually countries take. And this is what makes Japan unique in that sense as well, this soft power that comes out in those difficult times. And last example is moderation and graduation. So when they were deciding to implement sanctions against Iran, Japan and the European Economic Community, Japan requested European members to use the term measures instead of sanctions when referring to the US-led measures. So this would have a lesser impact on Iran, and it might ease a little bit the tension. So these are some examples from the second case study that really put into under the light the Japanese soft power. And here too, we can see that Japan did not really hesitate, again, to diverge from the United States. And even when it did gradually go to, ended up shifting toward the United States, it still had its own conditions and it did not give its unconditional support. So, and so, of course, these two conflicts are not the only ones, as there was a series of conflicts that happened in the 80s and the 90s, 2000s up until today. It has been a very long and tumultuous friendship road, but Japan and the Middle East have maintained their relationship, their resilient relationship, and it continues up until today. As we can see, some of the latest collaboration between both regions include, for example, very recently, it was in May, an agreement with the United Arab Emirates between Japan and the UAE to transfer defense equipment and technology. And just this week, Prime Minister Kishida was in the Middle East. He did his tour and visited Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, in order to collaborate on energy security and to work together toward decarbonization. And all these growing collaboration between the Middle East and Japan are just going strong and continue to grow. But this relationship has the potential to extend beyond economic and technological aspects. While this is all great, today Japan's political influence is growing. And this can be used as an opportunity to serve as a bridge between the Middle East and the West. And in order to do, one element to do this is, and this goes into my last slide, the perspective for relationship, for the future relationship with the Middle East, is that it can use the culture value. So it doesn't have to just be economic and technological aspect. What is lacking between Japan and the Middle East is an understanding of each other's culture. And I think this is not something that instantly people think of, that Japan and the Middle East have some values in common. Even me, as a Lebanese person living in Japan, it took me a while before realizing that we do have more in common than we would think. And these similar values include that both of our societies are directed more toward collectivism. We're not at all individualistic societies. We have a strong family orientation. We also have this indirect way of expressing needs. And so I think that understanding each other's culture can lead to better and long-term business exchanges. So this could be, this is just an example. It could be, for example, through collaboration in education. There are not enough Japanese universities branches in the Middle East. We don't hear of, for example, a Kyoto University branch somewhere in the Middle East, or Tokyo University branch, but this happens often, for example, with the United States or other European countries. Cornell University has opened a branch campus in Qatar, for example, in 2001. And it would be great if we can have more Japanese universities, or just think tanks, or any institutes that can open in the Middle East, and we can just start to collaborate on research together, on education together, and understand each other better. And another side of this is that the Middle East is known for its heavy migration of highly qualified Arabic youth. So, for example, I will again give the example of Lebanon, but there are around 4 million Lebanese people in Lebanon, but there are around 16 to 18 million Lebanese abroad. And today, Lebanon is facing a very tragic economic crisis, and the youth just is migrating heavily. And Japan is not at all a popular destination. Most Lebanese people, they go to the United States, they go to Europe, but Japan is not really a popular destination, and it can and it should be. And I think that this can come from just starting to do more long-term exchanges together and understand each other better. So especially that Japan is a great example of a balance between technological advancement and traditionalism, one that Arabic nations can relate to. And I really do believe that Japan has its specificity, even when it's, let's say, among G7, it's the only Asian country in the G7, and it's great, but it offers that additional uniqueness, is that it's not, it preserves its traditional values. And Arabic countries have a lot of traditional values, and I think this is a great example to aspire to learn from. And because at the end of the day, the Middle East is in Asia, after all. So this is my point, my perspective on the future, my hope. And I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abou-Khalil, for that wonderful presentation. It was really, really interesting. And we do have a couple questions. If I may, I would like to begin with a question of my own. So in your presentation, you mentioned that Japan had its own conditions when forging a friendship with Middle Eastern countries. So as you know, there's a lot of military bases in Japan, and Japan and the United States are really tight allies. could you, if you haven't already, could you go into the conditions in which Japan has used to maintain good relations with the Middle East despite being an ally of the United States?
Sure. Thank you very much for this question. In my presentation, it's true that Japan maintained certain conditions, but it was, I think the conditions in this particular cases were more toward the United States than the Middle East. It was more of, for example, in the second case study, when the United States wanted Japan to align with the United States and impose an embargo, there were some big economic projects that, for example, the IJPC, that Japan did not want to let go of. I think that in these dynamics, Japan was rather reacting to the Middle East and negotiating with the United States, if that makes sense. Like, it was more of a negotiation with the United States on what it's going to do with the Middle East. So I would say that the conditions were rather on the United States side than on the Middle East side. But with the Middle East, what it did is that, as I said, like there were a lot of meetings where something that is important to know is that the Middle East also had economic advantage with Japan. It was also afraid to lose some economic contracts with Japan. So, for example, the IJPC, it goes both ways. So Japan didn't want to lose it, but the United States didn't want, Iran didn't want to lose it either. And for example, if the Middle East cuts off Japan, it will also have some trouble finding suppliers for their oil. So in a way, that kind of set the balance. That's why it wasn't as, the conditions weren't as much directed with the Middle East as it was with the United States. It was more of a natural balance between the two, I would say.
Thank you so much. In trying to add to that question. So you mentioned in your last slide that there's a lot of relatively cultural things that Japan and the Middle East share that may not be as known to Japanese people or even the rest of the world for that matter. In your opinion, is there a specific soft power that the Middle East could use to kind of boast, not necessarily boast, but attract maybe more Japanese people to visit, for example, or to try to create better relations culturally between the two countries, since there are these similarities between the two countries, or the Japan and the region of the Middle East?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. So again, here I cannot talk about the Middle East as a whole because there are so many countries, and of course each country has its own culture, its own soft power. Maybe I can talk about Lebanon, and when I think of Lebanon, maybe this is a small example, but the first thing that comes to mind is that education. This is a domain or a field that both countries can find maybe a ground to collaborate on. Japanese, for example, kids are taught since a very young age to the sense of responsibility, how to clean after themselves, and how to, like little things like these that can be maybe exported to a place like Lebanon, where maybe kids do not necessarily learn these things at a very young age. What Lebanon can contribute is, for example, languages. Lebanese people, on average, a Lebanese person speaks at least 2 to 3 languages. And this is because from a very young age, you go to either a school that is French oriented or English oriented. And so it is almost impossible to avoid that. And so this diversity, like when we learn languages when we're at a young age, this is something maybe that can be exported to Japan, where there's sometimes this issue that Japanese people do not really speak English, or they don't have enough practice from the people that I've met. They tell me like maybe they know, but they don't have enough opportunities to practice. So maybe I can think of language. This is quite different, and I would say a sense of responsibility from the side of Japan. This is just an example that comes to mind when it comes to education at a young age, for example.
I see. Yeah, I think I definitely see through language what you mean as far as having this ability of being able to be multilingual. And then in some instances, Japan struggling with trying to become bilingual. So I understand that connection in that regard. Thank you so much. So moving on, Vivian Ning asked, can you share your thoughts on why Japan is not a popular destination for migrants from the Middle East? What are the factors that discourage such migration? And what are the factors that lag behind in terms of attracting such migration?
Thank you. This is again another very interesting and very important question. I would say that why Lebanese or why some Arabic people do not really think of Japan as a destination. Of course, first of all, there's the language barrier, and because maybe there aren't enough. It's very difficult to learn the Japanese language before going to Japan, and it's not necessarily the easiest language to learn. And maybe this is something that scares Arabic people from going to Japan. They wonder how they would have to adapt to the lifestyle there. But also, I would say that there's just not enough awareness. Like, for example, if the Middle East when they think of Japan, and there is a growing awareness, I must say, but it's still very low. When they think about Japan, maybe they think about the famous food that Japan has, maybe they think of manga, anime, maybe they think of these are the things that, for example, martial arts as well, but there isn't enough promotion or awareness that for example, if we are in an Arabic country and we don't meet, let's say, Japanese, there is no exchange programs at universities. This is something that put a distance between us. We don't really know how Japanese people way of life is, way of thinking is. In my department, political science, there were many French students that came there as an exchange program, and I got to meet a lot of French people, and I got to learn more about the French culture, and I felt closer to the French culture because I just met people from there, and we got to talk, and we got to debate, and we got to exchange. And this is lacking, and this is why I said in my previous slide, the long-term exchanges or university exchanges or any kind of exchange that can help us understand each other or just know about each other would break most of these obstacles, because I don't think that Japan is necessarily very different. I just think there isn't enough awareness of how maybe not that different it is. And there are maybe less than 100 Lebanese people in Japan, and this is part of the problem. We just don't know, and we need to start somewhere. And I think maybe universities or education is a good way to start raising that awareness among each other.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it makes me think about the scholarship, or I believe it's a scholarship, the MEX scholarship. I know a lot of foreign students who have utilized that scholarship, but to my knowledge, I don't know that many students from the Middle East that have come to well, you're the first. But perhaps that's a good start as far as trying to attract more university students from the Middle East to come to Japan and study here, and also get to know the Japanese culture, and perhaps, in turn, attract other students to come to word of mouth and things of that nature.
Well, actually, you're right. And MEX is a good example because, for example, but it also maybe depends on the size of our country. But in other countries, there are more students that are, or more candidates that are chosen every year to go on to have the MEX scholarship. And in Lebanon, the number is quite limited, first of all. And that's a good example because it was not it's not a scholarship that is popular. Like I happen to know about it, but in a very accidental way. It's not it wasn't as advertised or as common as other, scholarships coming from the United States or Europe. So that's a great example to maybe can have more scholarship or like open it to more students. But yeah, that's a good example that shows it's not well known and not enough.
Thank you so much. So we also have a question from Patricia Yarrow. Asks, are you advocating for more university international student exchanges between Japan and the Middle East? On the other hand, what about work and career exchanges?
Yes, absolutely. Not only university, but career exchanges is very important. Maybe I thought about university first because maybe I thought it would be easier because when I think of Lebanon and I think of people leaving the country, usually the people, not of course to a certain degree, but the majority of the people leaving are usually students that are looking for maybe graduate a scholarship to pursue their graduate degrees, and usually maybe younger people are more willing maybe to try something new, to try something different. They have maybe less, when I think of career changes, I think of maybe people that have family and that it might be just a bit more difficult to adapt to a whole new culture and maybe relocate with the family. But absolutely, career exchanges are just as important. I think that Lebanon and Japan can benefit a lot from each other in the world of business. And I think of I would say that I'm trying to think of fields in which Lebanon and Japan can cooperate. And I think, for example, startups is something that Lebanese and Japanese can collaborate on. The service industry is very strong in Lebanon, as I see in this comment. The service industry is one of the strong suit of Lebanon, and it's another industry that can be cooperated on. So of course, in Lebanon, as I said, the service industry is very strong, and entrepreneurial, everything that is entrepreneurial, the banking services. So these are kind of our strong suits, startups as well, more and more. And I would say that if this is possible, then yeah, career as well. I would just think that university can be easier, but this could come maybe at a later stage or in parallel. That would be just as great.
Thank you so much. So we also have Ryan, who asks, are there any incompatibilities between traditional Middle East and Japan? Japanese culture was often condemned by conservatives all over the world for different factors. So what do you think?
Sorry, can I ask you to repeat the question? Sorry. I'm not sure I understand what part of traditional aspect they are referring to.
Of course. So are there any incompatibilities between traditional Middle East and Japan? Japanese culture was often condemned by conservatives all over the world for different factors, such as decadence, corruption of youth, etc.
So I think incompatibilities between I'm sorry, I'm not sure I completely understand the question. I would not like to give an answer that is not on point.
Okay, we can come back to that. No problem.
Maybe if we can reformulate it just so I don't.
No worries.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, if you would like to add to your question, of course.
Sorry about that.
As far as I know, Japan is very proud that Japan has a a good relation and friendship with Israel for 70 years now. How it comes to be as true during the Yom Kippur War, as you mentioned, that they supported the Arab countries.
Thank you for your question. Yes, Japan and Israel have good relations, but just like Japan and the United States have good relations, but also as we saw, Japan did not always align 100% with the countries that it had. The United States is it's Japan's biggest ally, and it still didn't align fully. And Japan has good relationships with Israel, and Japan has good relations with Arabic countries as well. And this is why it's a complicated dynamics, and these are all complicated regions, and it's really about the nuances of every conflict, of every the time period. So Japan, of course, does not want to have bad relationships with Israel, and the United States pressure on Japan was because the United States is Israel's ally. So it was also, by extension, Japan's ally. But at that point, at that time, Japan did not want to risk having such a shortage of oil supply. And it actually, something that I skipped because of time constraint, but even during that time, the Yom Kippur, Japan actually went further, and regarding Israel, it implemented a lot of policies that limited trade between Israel and Japan. So this was not in the slide, but it was not just that it went with the Arabic countries. Its support toward our countries was even stronger because it implemented just direct policies that limited trade and limited business between Japan and Israel. So I don't think that necessarily means that Japan and Israel that doesn't mean they're not in a good relationship. I think it's just the natural nuances of each conflict. And I think just the natural we evolve, we adapt. Japan and Israel have today, they collaborate together, they cooperate together, but so does Japan and the Middle East. And that's why Prime Minister Kishida was in the Middle East this week. That's why it's just about adapting. That's why I called it navigating. It's not just so that black or white, but I guess at that moment, that was more important to Japan.
Thank you so much. Moving on, David Bowling asks, as for the Japan-Middle East relations now, it seems that countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar see Japan as reliable and not very demanding customer for energy. And that's about it. What do you think?
Thank you for the question. I think that it's beyond that. I think that UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, they see Japan as a reliable partner, definitely, and they see Japan as a country that has that is very advanced technologically, and they see Japan as a friend as well. A friend that has been, they have been building this relationship throughout decades. But I would say that it's really also about technology. Like Japan has an extreme advanced technology, and the fact that Japan has this mix between tradition and technological advancement, I think this is something that just makes Arabic countries feel closer to Japan. Compared to maybe the Western nations where they feel there's this it's more of a maybe sometimes business interaction. I think with Japan there is that element that keeps them closer, in addition to how much it can offer technologically and in the business side of things. But I really do think that it's beyond that, and I think that Japan's soft power and Japan's traditionalism play a big role here as well.
Thank you. Yi Chan asked, do you think the halal food industry could be a form of soft power between the two countries or the Middle Eastern region?
That's could be. That's an interesting thought. I think that Japan is very it's very it takes a lot of initiatives in implementing like providing halal food. This is what I see from at least my own experience. So first of all, of course, not all food in Middle East is halal. Not all people in the Middle East are Muslims, but the majority is, and so in that sense, that's true. I think that could be an element of connection. And as I said, Japan does make a lot of initiatives. I think there was not so. I don't remember the. Don't quote me on this, but there was something, a new project that Japan did. I think it was a moving halal restaurant or something. So it's kind of it takes a lot of initiatives to make it easier for Muslim people to be able to have halal food here. So I think, yeah, I think that is a good thought, a good maybe mean of connection. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vivian Ning asks, what do you think are the barriers preventing business collaboration between Japan and Lebanon and other Middle Eastern countries?
I think here again, it's a matter of language. I think that it's not, first of all, it's if the opportunities that are present in Lebanon and in Japan were better known in each other's country, already I feel like this would be a first step toward that. But I would say that lack of awareness, but especially language, if it's not the easiest, Japan is not the easiest place to set up a business. It's language-wise and like paperwork-wise, and if we don't understand what our rights will be or how to set up a business, and then there's another place that speaks the same language, that, you know, things are easier for us to just do, then of course we will take the easier option. And this is I feel it's just a waste in a way, because it's not something that cannot be overcome. It's just something that is not, it's simply unknown. It's not something that maybe Japanese people think of. They don't think of Lebanon, or Lebanese people don't think of Japan, but this could be changed. It's not an issue of just different culture or different. It's not something that is impossible even with awareness. It's just, I feel, a lack of awareness in many instances. And when I went to Japan, and when I told people that I went to Japan, it was a complete shock, because nobody could understand what does it mean? How is it there? What exactly does it look like to live in Japan, to work in Japan? So I feel like when you have exchanges or like advertisement of scholarship or businesses and everything in a language that you understand, you will read that and you will go for that. Whereas there's this other place that can offer you a lot and that you can maybe offer a lot to, but it's just, there is no way of connection between the two. And I think this is the first step. And then this will be less scary, and there will be less distance, and people will understand we're not so different. It's not that impossible. It's actually a great country and with great cultures that can come together and create something new, maybe. So.
Thank you. Gabby Worth asked, can we expect to see involvement of Middle Eastern countries and the free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP as Japan tries to build stronger ties in the Middle East?
That's, I would hope so. And I think that this is up to Japan at this point, but I feel like this relates a lot with the growing political influence that I mentioned, and this is absolutely the very good point to be raised. And this is where Japan can play the role of a bridge between the Middle East and the West. Japan is the only Asian member of the G7, and Japan hosted the G7 this year in Hiroshima. This is huge, and this is Japan is really reaffirming its role among Western nations, and Japan has the power to include other countries, among which maybe Arabic countries, in order to expand that. So I would say that this, again, it all comes back to awareness. It all comes back to really to cultural relationship as well, to understanding each other's culture. But if this is enhanced, then Japan can and has the power, and this is where it can be the bridge that we talked about, to bring the Middle East into that community, to use the Middle East as an additional force in order to preserve that free and open Indo-Pacific. So I think that's an absolutely great point and a very important one. And this is exactly what I wanted to say when I talked about the bridge. And this is really, Japan is showing more and more assertiveness, more and more power, more and more, while maintaining its distinctiveness. So that is absolutely up to Japan and up to us in promoting each other's culture and raising our awareness of each other.
Thank you so much. Just maybe a final comment very quickly from Patricia Yarrow. Perhaps tourism between Japan and the Middle East is a more realistic way to build that connection.
Yes, tourism is a great way to build that connection. That's good. That's true. Ideally, I think that long-term visits and long-term exchanges, it's just a better way to really understand the culture. Tourism is great, and I think it's always good to visit each other. But I have lived in Japan for 7 years, and I can say that for the first kind of almost half of my first stay, I did not understand the culture as much as I did in the second half. And this it goes way beyond a week or way beyond a month. And we're talking years, and it took me years to really understand the culture, to really to genuinely understand how Japanese people think, or to start feeling the impact of the culture on my daily lifestyle. It took me years. And so that makes me think that it will take more than weeks of tourism, while this is great. But for really long-term collaboration, I think that we need longer-term exchanges. We need deeper exchanges and visits.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abou-Khalil, for your presentation today and for taking time out of your evening to be with us. Thank you, everyone who joined us today for the webinar and for the presentation and for the amazing questions. We really appreciate it. And once again, thank you to our program sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York. And lastly, if everyone has a few minutes, I would like to present some upcoming events. So the next Getting to Know Japan webinar is on Japan-China relations. It will be next Tuesday, July 25th at 10 a.m. Dr. Stephen Nagy will be the speaker for this event. This is the next Getting to Know Japan webinar. We hope that you'll join us for that next week. And also, the next Indo-Pacific Dialogue will be on Wednesday, July 26th. It is on AUKUS and the Indo-Pacific. Tom Corbin will be the speaker for this event, and the moderator will be Dr. Nagy as well. Not an event, but an initiative that we are participating in ongoing. This is the Mongolia Connect program that is partnering with a range of partners to deliver 166 adjustable all-terrain wheelchairs to disabled children in the Mongolian countryside. Demonstrating this act of love and labor, YCAP's Mongolian Connect director, Nick Millward, will be partnering with an Australian and Mongolian to conduct a 24-hour rowathon from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. on July 29th and 30th. They will be rowing on machines outside of Anytime Fitness in East Brisbane Gym. We encourage everyone interested to jump on the rowers and struggle alongside them. But if you're unable to do that, we ask that you kindly donate to the efforts to fund these wheelchairs. They cost $35 a piece. So if you are interested, please scan this QR code that is attached to this flyer. Additionally, we will post the link for the PayPal page on our on the website, and we hope that you will consider donating and making a difference. And lastly, this is not necessarily an event, but some good news. YCAPS will be officially launching its YouTube channel and its Getting to Know Japan playlist of all the webinars thus far in a few days. So we kindly ask that you will please look out for the official announcement on our website and social media accounts. Once again, for all of you who are interested in watching the webinars that we've had thus far this year, we will be launching our official Getting to Know Japan playlist on the YCAPS YouTube page. So please look out for that announcement as we will do our best to spread the news as soon as it's officially launched. So everyone, thank you once again for your time today. Thank you, Dr. Abou-Khalil, for your time and for your wonderful presentation. We really enjoyed it, and we hope everyone that you'll join us next time. We thank you so much for your support. Have a great rest of your evening, your day, your morning, wherever it is that you are dialing in from, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.